Hi there, you're watching Grumpy Opinions. Continuing my reviews of Outlander, which is the show set in the 18th century and involves a time-travelling family of Scottish, American and English people and the adventures they get into. Episode 704, A Most Uncomfortable Woman. Like last week, this episode actually takes place in two different timelines, as well as with multiple character viewpoints. One of them is Roger and Bree in the 1970s, maybe, where they're now hard at work renovating Lallybroch from an old ruin into a livable home, and it's turning out to be far more expensive and time-consuming than they probably first thought. What's more, the wee kids have grown up to be proper wee pains in the neck, with Mandy being daft and Jemmy lying and stealing things. Apparently. And Bree's off to get work at a power plant as a safety engineer inspector or something, and is being confronted with all the expected sexism of the time.
Do you want to fetch us both a quick cuppa?
And then when she gets home, having landed the job, Roger doesn't actually seem that pleased because turns out he's in a big depressed dwam about being an unemployed bum and having no purpose in life. And Jemmy's been stealing a bunch of crisps and he's blaming something called a knuck la vie. Back in the past though, Jamie and Claire are out in the woods on the way to Wilmington, and Ian, as it turns out, is still all over the place, seeing Archbug in every single shadow and strange noise. And luckily they arrive in the town, only it's shocks and trouble all round, because Jamie bumps into that rebel dude from last season, who basically conscripts him and blackmails him on the spot into fighting in the war. Meanwhile, Claire bumps into Tom Christie, who's not dead, and gives her a smooch. And the pair have a big chat about how lucky Jamie is, because who wouldn't fancy Claire, and a couple other things. And it turns out Jamie's got a sense of humour about Tom giving her a smooch, because things are a lot more serious about the conscription, and Jamie has to be on a ship the next day. So of course, Claire isn't going to go back to Scotland if he's staying in America, so the pair of them are both off to Ticonderoga, while wee Ian is off to find some of his native peeps to bring on side. Meanwhile, young Master Willy Ransom is hanging about with his cousin Hal, and they're getting foo and unco happy. And then they bump into some soldiers tormenting a poxy whore and setting her on fire. And Willy tries to stop it, but it turns out she's too cooked already. But his bravery gets him noticed by his boss, and he sends him on a secret mission to deliver some notes to a trio of dudes down in dismal swampland.
What are you doing in my swamp?
On the way though, Willy's horse is spooked by a snake and he's thrown off and hurts his arm. Badly. And then after wandering about the woods like a fart in a trance, he bumps into wee Ian, and Ian takes him to a nearby Quaker farm where a pair of thee and thouing siblings are all about to chop his bad arm off, but then it barfs up some goo and everything's fine. I guess it must be like popping a really bad spot. And after that, Ian and the lassie make cow eyes at each other. For quite a long time. Seriously, I'm not even kidding, it goes on for ages. And then once he's gone, it's Willy's turn to flirt with her, and he finds out that one of the dudes that he's after is off to Ticonderoga, so he agrees to go with the Quakers, and it looks like we're off for a big family reunion at the Great Big Fort. So did I think? Well, colour me surprised, because I actually felt like this episode, or parts of it at least, were really good. You know, because even before going into the particulars, this felt like we're actually telling a story again. I mean, let's face it, Outlander has kind of been mired in a lot of soap opera style comings and goings, who's bonking who, someone done a murder, etc, stuff for a couple of seasons, all while they hang about in one place. And, you know, give or take a minor uprising or so. But now we've actually got the gang on the road, and they've got reasons to go places, and obstacles in their way, and more than that, they've now been dragged into a story of much bigger than them, the war. And being honest, I actually found it really refreshing to get to follow the story of William. It's like suddenly we've got a new viewpoint character, and the story's off in a different direction, although I kind of suspect that it's not going to be too long before he's back with Claire and Da, since, you know, they're all heading to the same place, Ticonderoga. And kudos to the effects team for the incredibly nasty looking wound and the almost amputation scene. And genuinely, I actually thought they were going to cut his arm off, because I don't know anything about the actor, and he could be an amputee and they might have just used a fake arm for the early scenes or body doubles, and that would have been fine. So I was properly squirming, like right up until the point where his elbow puked up all that gunge, and everyone was like, well, that's fine then. I mean, I presume that's accurate. They generally check these things, but it seemed a bit weird to me. Also, Tom Christie's still alive, which is great, and would have been a brilliant surprise if they hadn't put it on the next week on Outlander bit. Which, honestly, this show's marketing department...
I bet you sleep like fucking babies at night, don't you?
But I will say, Claire's shell-shocked face, both finding Tom alive, but also the bit when he gave her a smooch, was an absolute picture. And I really bought the scene of the pair of them talking about it, both thinking the other was dead and both kind of feeling responsible and sad. Her because of what happened and him because he's loved her from afar for ages. How it was actually him that put the obituary in the paper. That was just really well put together. Also, especially because it shows that Roger and Bree are just wrong about time travel and the past can't be changed, which is what the show's always said up until now. But also it was really well acted. And I'm just really glad to see Tom again, because Mark Jones is such a great actor. And frankly, he just blows everyone else off screen most of the time. I wasn't quite as hot on the scene after that, where Claire was basically grumping and saying, oh, how dare he, I wasn't happy about it. It just came across with her sounding a bit up herself. But on the other hand, I can't quite get behind some of the really poor writing during the Roger and Bree scenes. Like, not only when the workman's giving them a quote, the whole scene just felt horribly soapy, partly because the workman actor wasn't particularly good with his delivery. Also the bit where they look at the estimate but they don't say what it is, and they're kind of all just looking at the paper and going, this? This? It felt like I was watching Neighbours or EastEnders or something. The whole scene felt kind of just false and overwritten and a bit dithery, and all these scenes felt kind of that way, like we're missing context or we're missing just the writing that would fill in a lot of the gaps here. It almost felt like the actors aren't even that invested in it. I mean, God, even Roger can't even bring himself to laugh convincingly in the final scene. Yeah. I also don't understand the not talking to Jemmy thing. I mean, the fact is, he's a kid. He was very young when they were back in the past, and it's been 2 years or more now, and he will have forgotten what happened when he was back when he was 3 or 4 within a few years. Stuff like that doesn't stick with you for that long at that age. You know, if you take him to another time, another country, give him another life, send him to school, by the time he's 8 or 9, he's not going to remember where a cave in the woods in another country in another timeline after 200 years of land shift and change and growth and buildings and stuff. It's just not going to work. When they could just ask him, they could have just asked him and then written it all down. Also, Bree's interview scene, I mean, it was cute, don't get me wrong, I quite liked the way she turned around all of his daftness and his sexism, but it felt a little too modern. It didn't feel like 1970s modern, it felt like 21st century modern. It felt like something I should have seen in The Devil Wears Prada or something. Bree's supposed to be kind of like a flower child era rebel, but her and Roger hardly ever feel like they're of that age. They feel like modern day people up until they suddenly mention like a product from the 70s or a band that's from that era, and as if it's a brand new thing. Also, interestingly, a word on the Nuclavie. It was interesting they dropped that, because the Nuclavie is a bit of weird Orcadian mythology of all things, and if you've ever read up about it, it's kind of horrendous. It's like part man, part horse, but skinned, and has a mouth that's burning with fire and like a single red eye by some of the myths. So I mean, I'm guessing we're not actually going to see one in the story, but this scene more put me in mind of Great Expectations. You know, the bit at the beginning when Pip like meets Magwitch, and Magwitch tells him he's got an evil monster guy with him or something, so he has to bring him food. I was like, that rings an awful bell. And this show is never usually subtle, so clearly this is all set up for something. I'm kind of hoping it's actually going to be like a horribly burned and deformed Wendigo Donner who's followed them back through time to get revenge, but because at this point, I mean, honestly, who knows? It could be someone completely new. It could be something completely different. I mean, there's a lot of mentions of random things this week that seem to come out of nowhere that feel like they're set up for down the line, like Claire talking about telepathy suddenly out of nowhere, and you know, Jamie suddenly revealing he has dreams of the future a couple of weeks ago out of nowhere, and or the bit where they randomly just bring up Claire having magic power, and her powers will be most powerful when she has white hair, which somebody said to her back in season 3 or 4. I don't even remember when. But the fact that they're mentioning it means it's probably going to be important, either now or by the end of the season. And speaking about unsubtle, Ian and the Quaker lassie all but undressing each other with their eyes and staring like a pair of horny teenagers was kind of on the nose. But, I mean, after the Christies, I'm also kind of suspect of any brother and sister sharing a house together in the woods in this TV show. Now, also, I did kind of groan that Ian found Willy, like, in the middle of the woods. And also, the fact that Willy is supposed to be finding and delivering messages to people in the Dismal Swamp. So, heading off after one of them maybe isn't the best move. I mean, surely he could ask about the other people he's talking about and maybe drop in on them in the local pub or something. I mean, anyway, maybe next week, maybe that's sort of going to happen. Maybe they won't suddenly go to Ticonderoga immediately. Also, and this goes back to last week, is something strange up with John Bell's face? It looks like he's got fake tan plastered over the sides of his head really unevenly. It looks odd. Something looks different about him. It's like there's like an orangey splodginess to him. Odd. I don't know what that's all about. Anyway, I'm kind of ranting now, so let's just take stock, shall we? So this week really showed the new trajectory that this season seems to be lining up for, which kind of makes sense, because I actually listened to episode 702's commentary podcast thing, and the producers on that said that actually the 4 episodes from last season were kind of compressed and chopped up and actually squeezed into episodes 1 and 2 of this season. So it's not the first 4 episodes, it's the first 2 episodes that are filling in all the gaps from season 6. Now, I'm not sure that was the best idea, and it kind of explains why those first 2 episodes were such a convoluted mess and felt so absolutely all over the place. And last week, maybe that was just tying up a lot of loose ends and setting up like the bugs going forwards, and it does make a little bit more sense as to why the whole reading letters framing device just appeared out of nowhere last week and felt like very much like it was something that should have been at the beginning of a season rather than appearing a few episodes in. Now, again, as I said, not sure that this is the best way that they could have dealt with all this, but, I mean, they had to do what they had and with the difficult situation. Now, honestly, the show has a real adventure going for Ian and Willy. We've got some romance and maybe even a love triangle thrown in there. We've got Jamie and Claire off to war again, and we've got marital and sociocultural woes in the 70s with Roger and Brianna, and possibly a demon attacking them some point soon. I mean, it's kind of interesting. And honestly, I haven't felt quite this invested in this show in a while. Not probably since the last time was maybe when I mistakenly assumed that the Malva murder was going to lead to be a big season-long whodunit. But I will leave it on a note of cautious optimism. At this point, I actually think Season 7 could be a pretty interesting season. But till next time, these have been my grumpy opinions.